Welcome to Fright Club. The first rule of Fright Club is you do talk about Fright Club, based on true events. The Memory Thief. From the private journal of Dr. Sarah Chen, date October 12th, 2024. I write these words with a trembling hand, though whether the tremor springs from exhaustion, excitement, or some more sinister source, I cannot with certainty determine. The events which I am compelled to record may strain the credulity of any rational mind. Indeed, they strain my own, yet I am bound by the sacred duty of scientific observation to document what I have witnessed, however extraordinary it may appear. It began, as all the most insidious maladies do, with the merest suggestion of abnormality. I was seated in my office at the Johns Hopkins Memory Disorders Clinic, dictating case notes for Mrs. Eleanor Walsh, an octogenarian whose mind has become a crumbling edifice, ravaged by the merciless advance of Alzheimer's disease. The afternoon light filtered through the windows with that peculiar quality of autumn, golden yet melancholy, as if the very photons carried within them the weight of impending decay. Patient exhibits severe episodic memory impairment, I intoned to my recording device, my voice carrying the clinical precision that 8 years of neurological practice had instilled within me. Semantic memory remains partially intact. Emotional memory shows, and then it happened. Without warning, without precedent, without any rational explanation that my trained mind could summon, I was no longer Dr. Sarah Chen, sitting in her sterile office surrounded by the accumulated detritus of medical practice. I was Eleanor Walsh, 23 years old, dancing in the arms of my beloved Thomas on our wedding day. The year was 1955, and the world was bright with possibility. I felt the whisper of silk against my skin, my grandmother's wedding dress, altered with loving care to fit my slender frame. The scent of gardenias filled my nostrils, their creamy petals adorning my hair with delicate precision. Thomas's hands were warm against my waist as we swayed to the strains of Moon River, and his eyes, oh, his eyes held such tenderness, such promise of the life we would build together. The memory was not vague or dreamlike, as recollections often are. It possessed the vivid immediacy of present experience. I could taste the champagne on my lips, feel the slight ache in my feet from the new shoes, hear the rustle of my father's newspaper as he dabbed at his eyes during our first dance. Every sensation was rendered with crystalline clarity, more real than the office chair beneath me, more substantial than the clinical walls that surrounded me. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the vision dissolved. I found myself once again in my office, the recording device still clutched in my hand, its red light blinking with patient expectation. My heart hammered against my ribs with such violence that I feared it might burst from my chest entirely. The taste of champagne lingered phantom-like upon my tongue, though I had consumed nothing but coffee since dawn. For several minutes, or was it hours, I sat in stunned silence, attempting to rationalize what had occurred. Fatigue, surely. I had been working 18-hour days for the better part of 3 months, driven by an obsession with my research into memory consolidation that my colleagues had begun to characterize as unhealthy. Dr. Marcus Webb, my department head, had suggested with increasing frequency that I take a sabbatical, though I had dismissed such notions with the contempt they deserved. But this was beyond mere exhaustion. I am a neurologist, trained in the intricate machinery of the human brain, yet I could find no medical explanation for experiencing another person's memory with such vivid authenticity. The phenomenon defied every principle of neuroscience I had dedicated my life to understanding. I attempted to resume my dictation, but the words would not come. Instead, I found myself pulling Mrs. Walsh's file from my desk drawer, studying her photograph with newfound intensity. There she was, Eleanor Walsh at 23. Radiant in her wedding dress, the very image I had somehow witnessed from within her own consciousness. The photograph had been provided by her daughter as part of our memory stimulation therapy, yet I had never examined it with such attention to detail. How had I known about the gardenias, the champagne, the specific song that had played during her first dance? These details were not contained within any of my case notes, nor had Mrs. Walsh herself, in her current diminished state, possessed the clarity to share such intimate particulars. October 13th, 2024. Sleep eluded me last night, as it has with increasing frequency of late. I lay in my bed, that sterile expanse of Egyptian cotton, in my equally sterile apartment, and replayed the afternoon's events with the methodical precision of a forensic scientist examining evidence of some inexplicable crime. This morning brought a new patient. Henry Morrison, 78 years old, presenting with early-stage dementia and a particular deficit in autobiographical memory. A retired farmer from the Eastern Shore, he has begun to lose track of the pastoral life that once defined his existence. His weathered hands, I noted, still carry the calluses of decades spent working the soil, though his mind can no longer fully grasp the significance of those permanent marks. I conducted my standard battery of cognitive assessments, watching with clinical detachment as Mr. Morrison struggled to recall details of his childhood home. It was during the word association test that the second incident occurred. I had asked him to describe his earliest memory, hoping to stimulate what remained of his temporal lobe function. His eyes grew distant, and he spoke haltingly of summers spent on his grandfather's farm, of learning to milk cows in the pre-dawn darkness, of the particular satisfaction that comes from honest labor performed in service of the land. As he spoke, something extraordinary began to happen. The sterile examination room faded around me like morning mist, and I found myself standing in a barn that smelled of hay and animal warmth. My hands, no, Henry's hands, though I experienced them as my own, grasped the smooth wooden handle of a milk pail. The cow before me, a gentle Holstein named Bessie, shifted slightly as I settled onto the three-legged stool. The rhythm of milking came naturally, as if muscle memory transcended the boundaries of individual consciousness. I felt the satisfaction Henry had described, not as an observer, but as a participant in this pastoral symphony. The milk struck the pail with its distinctive metallic ring, and I knew with absolute certainty that after this chore was complete, Grandfather Morrison would prepare his famous buckwheat pancakes, drizzled with maple syrup from trees that had been tapped by 3 generations of the family. Again, the vision dissolved as abruptly as it had begun. Mr. Morrison was looking at me with concern, his rheumy eyes reflecting worry that my own expression had somehow alarmed him. "Doctor, are you quite well?" I assured him that I was, though the assertion felt increasingly hollow with each passing moment. How could I explain that I had just experienced his childhood with such vivid authenticity that I could still feel the warmth of Bessie's flank against my palm? How could I rationalize possessing knowledge of his grandfather's culinary preferences, details that Mr. Morrison himself, in his current state, could no longer consciously access? October 14th, 2024. I have begun to research similar cases in the medical literature, though I confess my searches have yielded little of relevance. There are documented instances of healthcare providers developing excessive empathy for their patients, a condition sometimes termed emotional contagion, but nothing approaching the vivid, experiential memories I have been encountering. Dr. Webb cornered me in the staff lounge this afternoon, his expression carrying that particular blend of concern and professional obligation that I have learned to dread. "Sarah," he said, settling into the chair across from me with the deliberate movements of a man preparing for an uncomfortable conversation. "I've been observing your recent behavior, and I'm concerned. You're working excessive hours. You appear to have lost weight, and yesterday's staff meeting, you seemed distracted, disoriented even." I attempted to deflect his concerns with my usual arsenal of professional competence and academic achievement. "My research into memory consolidation is at a critical juncture, Marcus. The implications for treating degenerative conditions could be revolutionary. That's precisely what worries me." His voice carried the weight of years spent watching brilliant minds destroy themselves in pursuit of impossible answers. You're beginning to sound like every researcher who's ever crossed the line from scientific inquiry into obsession. Obsession. The word struck me with unexpected force, though I maintained my composure with the skill of one trained in the art of clinical detachment. Was that what this was? Had my dedication to understanding the mysteries of memory and consciousness led me into the treacherous territory of professional fixation? Yet how could I explain to Marcus that my experiences transcended mere academic interest? These were not theoretical constructs or abstract hypotheses. They were memories so vivid, so emotionally resonant, that they threatened to eclipse my own recollections of the past. October 15th, 2024. The third incident occurred this evening, and I fear it may have been the most profound yet. I remained at the clinic long after the scheduled appointments had concluded, using the solitude to review patient files and contemplate the inexplicable nature of my recent experiences. Anna Petrov, 86 years old, survivor of unimaginable horrors during the Second World War, now struggling with advanced dementia that has begun to unlock traumatic memories her conscious mind had spent decades suppressing. Her file contained only the barest clinical details: age, diagnosis, medication regimen. But as I read her case notes, the familiar sensation began to overtake me. I was no longer in my office, no longer in Baltimore, no longer in the 21st century. I was Anna, 12 years old, huddled in the basement of a bombed cathedral in Warsaw, listening to the distant sounds of artillery fire, while my mother whispered prayers in Polish that I could not understand, but somehow comprehended with perfect clarity. The terror was absolute, primal, unlike anything I had ever experienced in my own sheltered existence. I felt the gnawing hunger that had become a constant companion, the cold that seeped through the thin fabric of my coat, the desperate hope that my father would return from whatever mission had taken him into the burning city above. But beneath the fear lay something else, a fierce determination to survive, to bear witness, to ensure that the world would someday know what had been endured in that basement and countless others like it. I felt Anna's child mind grappling with concepts too vast and terrible for comprehension, yet somehow finding the strength to endure what no child should ever be forced to witness. When the memory released its hold upon me, I found myself weeping with such violence that my body shook with each sob. These were not my tears, yet they felt more genuine than any emotion I had experienced in years. The grief was not mine, the trauma belonged to another, yet the experience had branded itself upon my consciousness with indelible force. I write these words now in the small hours of the morning, having been unable to return to my apartment. Something is happening to me, something that transcends the boundaries of conventional medical understanding. Whether it represents a breakthrough in the study of consciousness or a descent into madness, I cannot yet determine. What I do know is this: the memories are becoming more frequent, more vivid, more emotionally overwhelming. Each episode leaves me feeling as though I have lived another's life, experienced their joys and sorrows as my own. Yet how can this be possible? How can the mind of one person access the authentic experiences of another? I fear that I am losing myself in the labyrinth of other people's recollections, becoming a repository for fragments of lives I have never lived. Yet I cannot bring myself to seek help, for who would believe such an account? And more troubling still, some part of me, the part that has dedicated its existence to unraveling the mysteries of memory and consciousness, finds these experiences intoxicating in their intensity. I have always prided myself on my rational mind, my scientific training, my ability to distinguish between objective reality and subjective experience. Yet now, I find myself questioning the very nature of identity, wondering where Sarah Chen ends and these borrowed memories begin. Tomorrow, I will return to the clinic, will see more patients, will no doubt experience more of these impossible recollections. I tell myself that I am conducting research, exploring uncharted territories of consciousness. But in my most honest moments, I must admit the truth. I am becoming addicted to these stolen fragments of other lives. For what is my own existence compared to the rich tapestry of experiences I have begun to access? My life, sterile, academic, emotionally barren since the divorce, pales in comparison to Eleanor's radiant wedding day, Henry's pastoral childhood, Anna's harrowing survival. Their memories possess a vividness, an emotional resonance that my own recollections lack. Perhaps this is what madness feels like, not the dramatic breakdown depicted in literature, but a gradual erosion of the boundaries between self and other, reality and memory, authentic experience and borrowed consciousness. If so, I find myself wondering whether sanity is truly worth preserving when it offers so little compared to the alternative. I close this entry now, though sleep seems as distant as ever. Tomorrow will bring new patience, new opportunities to explore this phenomenon, new chances to lose myself in the memories of others. The rational part of my mind whispers warnings about professional ethics, about the danger of crossing boundaries that should never be violated. But that voice grows fainter with each passing day, drowned out by the siren song of other people's lives, other people's loves, other people's losses. I fear I am becoming something other than Sarah Chen, neurologist and researcher. I am becoming a collector of memories, a thief of experiences, a creature who feeds upon the recollections of others. God help me, I am not certain I wish to stop. From the private journal of Dr. Sarah Chen, date, October 18th, 2024. I awaken this morning in a state of profound disorientation, though whether the confusion springs from the ethereal realm of dreams or some more tangible source of bewilderment, I cannot with certainty ascertain. The familiar contours of my bedroom appear somehow foreign, as if viewed through the distorting lens of water or fever dream. Upon my nightstand lies a collection of handwritten notes, pages upon pages covered in my own precise script. Yet I possess no recollection of their composition. The notes detail consultations with patients I have never met, describe symptoms and treatments for cases that exist nowhere in our clinic's official records. One entry, dated yesterday evening, provides exhaustive documentation of a session with one Margaret Donnelly, aged 74, suffering from vascular dementia complicated by aphasia. The handwriting is unmistakably my own, the medical terminology precisely accurate, yet I swear upon my professional oath that no such patient has ever crossed the threshold of my office. More disturbing still is the level of intimate detail contained within these mysterious notes. Margaret, according to my own hand, grew up in County Cork, Ireland, the youngest of 7 children, in a household where poverty was as constant a companion as the Atlantic wind that rattled their cottage windows. She emigrated to America in 1969, carrying nothing but a battered suitcase and her grandmother's rosary beads, seeking the promise of prosperity that had lured so many of her countrymen across the ocean's vast expanse. How could I know such particulars about a woman I have never encountered? From whence springs this knowledge of her childhood fears, her first taste of chocolate, the particular way her mother hummed Irish ballads while hanging laundry in the grey morning light? October 19th, 2024. The telephone rang at midnight, jarring me from a restless slumber filled with fragments of other people's dreams. The voice belonged to my sister Jennifer, calling from her home in Seattle with the mixture of concern and exasperation that has characterized our interactions since the dissolution of my marriage 6 months past. Sarah, I've been trying to reach you for days. Your phone goes straight to voicemail, and when I called the clinic, they said you've been working irregular hours. Are you taking care of yourself? I attempted to reassure her with platitudes about professional dedication and the pressing nature of my research. But even as the words left my lips, I recognized their hollow ring. How could I explain to Jennifer, practical Jennifer, with her accounting degree and her orderly suburban existence, that I had become a vessel for the memories of strangers? How could I describe the intoxicating pull of experiencing lives more vivid, and emotionally resonant than my own sterile existence. "You sound different," she pressed, with that particular intuition that siblings develop through decades of shared experience. "Distant, distracted. When was the last time you ate a proper meal?" I could not answer her question, for I realized with sudden alarm that I possessed no clear recollection of my recent nutritional habits. The past week had become a blur of patient consultations, memory episodes, and fevered documentation of experiences that might or might not have occurred. My refrigerator, upon inspection, contained only coffee, leftover Chinese takeout of questionable vintage, and a collection of prescription bottles that seemed more numerous than I remembered purchasing. After ending the call with promises to Jennifer that we both knew I would not keep, I found myself drawn once again to my patient files. The urge to revisit the cases, to seek some pattern or explanation for my extraordinary experiences, had become as compulsive as any addiction I had ever observed in the psychiatric literature. October 21st, 2024. I have begun to conduct experiments of a most unorthodox nature, though I tell myself they serve the sacred cause of scientific advancement rather than mere personal fascination. During patient consultations, I have taken to handling objects that my subjects have touched: spectacles, jewelry, handkerchiefs, seeking to determine whether physical contact might serve as a conduit for the memory phenomena I have been experiencing. The results have been nothing short of extraordinary. This afternoon, while examining Mrs. Rose Kowalski, an 81-year-old former seamstress whose mind has become a patchwork of missing pieces, I deliberately grasped the golden thimble she carries as a memento of her working years. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. I was transported to a sweatshop in Baltimore's garment district, circa 1962, my fingers flying over fabric with the practiced precision of one whose livelihood depends upon speed and accuracy. The room was thick with lint and the chatter of immigrant women in a dozen different languages, all united by the necessity of survival in a new world that promised much but delivered little to those who toiled in its shadows. I felt the ache in my back from hours spent hunched over the sewing machine, the strain in my eyes from working by inadequate light, the constant fear that any mistake might cost me the employment upon which my family's welfare depended. Yet there was pride too, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful from mere cloth, of transforming raw material into garments that would adorn women who moved through worlds I could only imagine. The memory was so vivid, so emotionally authentic, that when I returned to my own consciousness, I found tears streaming down my cheeks. Mrs. Kowalski was regarding me with concern, her clouded eyes reflecting worry that my obvious distress had somehow alarmed her. "Doctor, are you quite well? You look as though you've seen a ghost." Indeed, I had seen ghosts, the ghosts of her youth, the phantoms of her purpose, the specters of a life lived with dignity despite circumstances that would have broken a lesser spirit. I hastily composed myself and completed the consultation, but the thimble's memory lingered in my consciousness like a haunting melody that refuses to be silenced. October 23rd, 2024. Dr. Webb has begun to observe my behavior with increasing scrutiny, and I fear his concerns about my professional conduct are not entirely without merit. Yesterday, during our weekly staff meeting, I found myself responding to questions that had not been asked, referencing patients whose names appeared on no official roster, describing treatment protocols for conditions that existed only in the memories I had somehow acquired. "Sarah," he said to me afterward, his voice carrying the particular tone that medical professionals reserve for delivering unwelcome diagnoses, "I'm going to be direct with you. Your colleagues are concerned. You've been working erratic hours. You appear to have lost considerable weight. And yesterday, you seemed to be conducting conversations with people who weren't present in the room." I attempted to deflect his observations with technical explanations about my research methodology, but even as I spoke, I could hear the strain in my own voice. The boundaries between my professional self and the memories I had been collecting were becoming increasingly porous, like walls eroded by a tide that grows stronger with each passing day. "I think you should consider taking some time off," Webb continued. "Perhaps seek consolation. The stress of our work, particularly with memory disorders, can affect even the most experienced practitioners. Consolation." The suggestion struck me as both insulting and irrelevant. How could any therapist understand the extraordinary gift I had discovered? How could they comprehend that I had been granted access to the most intimate chambers of human consciousness, allowed to experience the accumulated wisdom and sorrow of lives that spanned decades of joy and tragedy? Yet even as I rejected his concern, some small, still rational part of my mind whispered warnings about the path I was treading. The medical literature is replete with cases of healthcare professionals who became too involved with their patients, who crossed boundaries that existed for the protection of both doctor and subject. Was I becoming one of those cautionary tales? Had my pursuit of understanding led me into territory that no ethical practitioner should explore? October 25th, 2024. I have discovered something that defies all rational explanation, yet the evidence lies before me in black and white, documented with the meticulous precision that has characterized my professional life since I first donned the white coat of medical practice. While reviewing security footage from the clinic, footage I accessed through means I prefer not to record in detail, I observed myself conducting patient consultations during hours when I have no memory of being present at the facility. The timestamp indicates Tuesday evening, October 22nd at 11:47 p.m. Yet I distinctly recall being at home that night, reading journals and attempting to make sense of my recent experiences. In the grainy black and white recording, I watch myself enter examination room 3, where an elderly gentleman sits waiting with the patient resignation of one accustomed to medical appointments. I observe myself conducting what appears to be a standard cognitive assessment, taking notes with my characteristic thoroughness, engaging in animated conversation with a man whose identity remains unknown to my conscious mind. Most unsettling of all is my demeanor in the footage. I move with confidence and purpose, displaying none of the confusion or disorientation that has plagued my recent days. It is as if some other version of myself, a more competent, more assured Sarah Chen, has taken control during these mysterious episodes. I have watched the recording 17 times, searching for some indication of deception or technical malfunction, yet the evidence is irrefutable. I am conducting patient sessions that my conscious mind cannot recall, documenting cases that exist in my handwriting but not in my memory, living portions of my professional life in a state of complete dissociation from my waking consciousness. The implications are too terrible to contemplate fully. If I cannot trust my own perceptions, my own memories, then how can I trust anything? If my mind is capable of creating elaborate delusions of patient interactions, of fabricating detailed medical histories for people who may not exist, then what separates me from the very patients I have dedicated my career to treating? October 27th, 2024. The episodes are accelerating, both in frequency and intensity. What began as occasional glimpses into other people's memories has evolved into something far more comprehensive and disturbing. I find myself losing hours at a time, returning to consciousness with no recollection of how I came to be in particular locations or what activities I may have pursued during these gaps in awareness. This morning, I discovered my apartment transformed into what can only be described as a shrine to other people's lives. Photographs I do not remember acquiring line my bookshelves. Wedding portraits, family gatherings, candid snapshots of moments that belong to strangers yet feel intimately familiar. Personal effects that I cannot account for purchasing have appeared throughout my living space. A carved wooden jewelry box that smells of lavender and old secrets. A military medal earned by someone else's courage. A child's stuffed rabbit worn soft by decades of devoted companionship. Each object carries with it a weight of memory that threatens to overwhelm my own fragile sense of identity. When I touch the jewelry box, I experience the joy of a young woman receiving it as a wedding gift from her beloved grandmother. The military medal transports me to the muddy hell of Normandy, where a young soldier named David Morrison earned his Bronze Star through acts of valor that cost him everything but his life. The stuffed rabbit holds within its fabric the accumulated tears and laughter of 3 generations of children who found comfort in its faithful presence. I know these are not my memories, yet they feel more authentic than my own recollections of childhood, more emotionally resonant than the sterile experiences that have comprised my adult existence. I am becoming a repository for other people's lives, a living archive of experiences that span the full spectrum of human emotion and endeavor. The rational part of my mind, the part trained in the rigorous discipline of medical science, recognizes the symptoms of severe psychological disturbance, the gaps in memory, the false recollections, the inability to distinguish between authentic experience and elaborate fantasy. These are the hallmarks of conditions I have spent my career diagnosing in others. Yet I cannot bring myself to seek help, for who would believe such an account? And more troubling still, I find myself reluctant to surrender these extraordinary experiences. What is my own mundane existence compared to the rich tapestry of lives I have been privileged to witness? What value does Sarah Chen, the neurologist, possess when weighed against Sarah Chen, the keeper of memories, the guardian of experiences too precious to be lost to the ravages of time and disease? I fear I am losing myself in the labyrinth of other people's recollections, yet I cannot find within me the desire to escape. Each memory I encounter is a gift, a window into the infinite complexity of human experience, a reminder that life contains depths of meaning and beauty that my own sterile existence has never approached. Perhaps this is what it means to truly live, not through the accumulation of one's own experiences, but through the profound empathy that allows us to share in the joys and sorrows of others. Perhaps I am not losing my mind, but finding my soul, discovering the interconnectedness that binds all human consciousness into a single, magnificent tapestry of shared experience. Tomorrow I will return to the clinic, will see more patients, will no doubt encounter more of these miraculous intrusions into the lives of others. I tell myself that I am conducting research, exploring the frontiers of consciousness and memory, but in my most honest moments, I must acknowledge the truth. I am becoming addicted to these borrowed fragments of existence. For what is sanity compared to the intoxicating richness of living 1,000 lives? What is individual identity weighed against the privilege of experiencing the full spectrum of human emotion and experience? I am transforming from a mere observer of memory disorders into something far more extraordinary, a vessel for the preservation of human experience itself. God help me. I no longer wish to be saved from this beautiful madness. From the private journal of Dr. Sarah Chen, date November 2nd, 2024. I sit before this journal in the wan hours of morning, when the veil between consciousness and dream grows thin, and I find myself compelled to record events that would surely strain the credulity of any rational observer. Yet rationality, I confess, has become a luxury I can no longer afford. The boundaries that once delineated proper conduct from forbidden territory have dissolved like sugar in rain, leaving me adrift in waters whose depths I am only beginning to fathom. The security footage continues to reveal activities conducted by my physical form during hours when my conscious mind resides elsewhere, or perhaps nowhere at all. Last evening's recording shows me in examination room 2 at 2:17 a.m., engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Dorothy Henshaw, a woman whose case file indicates she died 3 weeks ago. Yet there, she sits in the grainy footage, nodding with apparent comprehension, as I gesture toward charts and diagrams that exist nowhere in our official medical literature. I have no memory of this encounter, no recollection of unlocking the clinic, of preparing examination materials, of conducting what appears to be an intensive therapeutic session with a deceased patient. The implications are too monstrous to contemplate directly, yet like Pandora before her fatal curiosity, I find myself drawn inexorably toward truths that may well destroy what remains of my professional reputation and personal sanity. November 4th, 2024. I have begun what I can only describe as systematic experimentation, though I am acutely aware that my methods would horrify any ethical review board. The compulsion to understand these phenomena has grown beyond mere professional interest. It has become the driving force of my existence, consuming every waking moment and haunting my increasingly fragmented sleep. During yesterday's appointments, I deliberately manipulated circumstances to maximize physical contact with my patient's personal effects. Mrs. Clara Benedetti, suffering from moderate Alzheimer's with profound agitation, clutches a rosary that belonged to her grandmother, a relic from the old country that has provided comfort through decades of American struggles. When I accidentally brushed against the worn beads while adjusting her medication chart, the effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. I was transported to a village in Calabria, circa 1943, where young Clara Benedetti stood in a church that smelled of incense and fear. The Nazis had occupied the region, and rumors of deportations filled the air like poisonous smoke. I felt the smooth texture of the rosary beads between my fingers, Clara's fingers, as I prayed with the desperate fervor of one who has witnessed evil beyond comprehension. The memory was not merely visual or auditory. It encompassed the complete sensory experience of another human being at a moment of existential terror. I could taste the metallic tang of fear in my mouth, feel the rough wool of my Clara's coat against skin that had not known sufficient food for months. Most profoundly, I experienced the absolute faith that sustained this young woman through circumstances that would have broken lesser spirits. When the vision dissolved, I found myself weeping openly in the examination room, my professional composure shattered by the intensity of borrowed emotion. Mrs. Benedetti regarded me with the confused sympathy that the elderly often display toward the distressed, her clouded eyes reflecting concern for my obvious anguish. "Doctor, you cry like someone who has lost everything," she said in her careful English, still tinged with the accent of her homeland. "But sometimes tears wash clean the soul, no?" How could I explain that I had indeed lost everything? My objectivity, my professional boundaries, perhaps my very sanity, yet had gained access to experiences more profound and authentic than any I had ever lived. How could I describe the intoxicating pull of other people's memories, the way they made my own existence seem pale and insubstantial by comparison? November 7th, 2024. The transformation of my apartment into what can only be described as a museum of stolen lives has accelerated beyond all reason. Objects appear daily, though I possess no memory of acquiring them. A fountain pen that belonged to a journalist who covered the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, a wedding ring worn by 3 generations of immigrant women, a pocket watch that ticked away the final moments of a soldier's life in a French field hospital. Each artifact carries within it a complete narrative, a fragment of human experience so vivid and emotionally resonant that touching them becomes an act of psychological communion. I have arranged these objects throughout my living space with the reverence of a curator preparing a sacred exhibition, though I am both the sole visitor to this gallery and its unwitting subject. The fountain pen, when grasped with proper intent, transports me to the liberated camps of 1945, where correspondent Eleanor Walsh documented horrors that human language could barely contain. I experience his struggle to find words adequate to the reality before him, feel his hands shake as he attempts to record testimony from survivors whose eyes held depths of suffering that no camera could capture. The wedding ring connects me to 3 distinct timelines. Anna Kowalski receiving it from her beloved Joseph in a candlelit ceremony in war-torn Poland, her daughter Maria wearing it as she raised 4 children in a Baltimore tenement, and granddaughter Susan placing it in her mother's coffin with trembling fingers that carried the weight of 3 generations of love and loss. The pocket watch brings me to a field hospital near Verdun, where young Dr. Michael Harrison spent his final moments not thinking of his own approaching death, but calculating how many more wounded soldiers he might treat if he could somehow remain conscious for just a few more minutes. His dedication to healing persisted, even as his own life ebbed away, a commitment so profound that it transcends the mere measurement of time. These are not hallucinations or fantasies. They possess a specificity and emotional authenticity that surpasses my own memories of lived experience. Through these objects, I have become a repository for the accumulated wisdom, suffering, and triumph of human existence across decades and continents. November 10th, 2024. Dr. Pry Webb confronted me this morning with evidence of my increasingly erratic behavior, though his observations reflect only the surface manifestations of my transformation. He presented a folder containing incident reports from night security, documentation of my after-hours presence at the clinic, and testimonials from colleagues regarding my concerning interactions with patients. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the weight of professional obligation and personal concern, "I've reviewed the security footage from the past 3 weeks. You've been accessing the facility during unauthorized hours, conducting what appear to be patient sessions without proper documentation, and exhibiting behavior that can only be characterized as deeply troubling." I attempted to explain my research methodology, the groundbreaking nature of my discoveries regarding memory transference and consciousness connectivity, but even as I spoke, I could hear the fevered quality of my own voice. The words tumbled forth in elaborate cascades of medical terminology and theoretical speculation, yet I could see in Webb's expression that he interpreted my eloquence as evidence of psychological disturbance rather than scientific breakthrough. "You're describing phenomena that have no basis in established neuroscience," he replied with the patient tone reserved for delusional patients. "Memory cannot transfer between individuals through physical contact. Personal effects cannot contain the experiences of their former owners. What you're experiencing may feel authentic, but it represents a serious departure from reality." Reality. The word struck me as both meaningless and tragically limiting. How could Webb, constrained by conventional understanding of consciousness and memory, comprehend the extraordinary territories I had begun to explore? How could any traditionally trained physician understand that I had discovered pathways of human experience that transcended the artificial boundaries between individual minds? I assured him that my research remained within ethical parameters, though even as I spoke, I knew this assertion bordered on falsehood. The methods I had begun employing, the deliberate manipulation of patient interactions, the unauthorized access to personal effects, the systematic cultivation of memory episodes, surely violated every principle of medical ethics I had once held sacred. Yet how could I abandon this work when it offered insights into the nature of human consciousness that could revolutionize our understanding of memory, identity, and the connections that bind all minds into a larger tapestry of shared experience? November 13th, 2024. I have made a discovery that validates every risk I have taken, every boundary I have crossed in pursuit of understanding. While conducting an extended session with Mr. James Morrison, no relation to the young Henry Morrison whose childhood memories I experienced weeks ago, I achieved what can only be described as complete memory integration. Mr. Morrison, a 91-year-old former jazz musician whose mind has been ravaged by advanced dementia, brought with him a trumpet that had been his constant companion for 7 decades of musical performance. When I deliberately grasped the instrument's worn brass surface, the experience transcended anything I had previously encountered. I became James Morrison at 23, standing on the stage of the Cotton Club in 1954, my trumpet raised to lips that had learned to speak the language of bebop in the smoky clubs of Kansas City. The music that flowed through me, through him, possessed a complexity and emotional depth that my own trained mind could never have comprehended. Each note was a word in a vocabulary of human experience, each phrase a complete statement about love, loss, hope, and the indomitable spirit that drives artistic creation. But the experience extended beyond that single moment. Through the trumpet's accumulated memories, I lived James Morrison's entire musical journey, his first lessons with an aging mentor who had played with Armstrong himself, his struggles with addiction and racism in an industry that alternately celebrated and exploited black talent, his eventual triumph as a composer whose work would influence generations of musicians yet to come. For nearly 6 hours, I existed completely as James Morrison, my own identity subsumed within his richer, more emotionally complex consciousness. When I finally returned to my own awareness, I found myself seated in the examination room, while security guards attempted to determine how I had become locked inside the clinic overnight. Mr. Morrison was gone, though whether he had been discharged by other staff or had simply departed of his own volition, I could not determine. The trumpet remained in my possession, though I have no memory of how I came to acquire it. When questioned about the circumstances, I found myself unable to provide coherent explanations that would satisfy security protocols. November 16th, 2024. The revelation has come with crushing clarity. I am no longer conducting research into memory transference phenomena. I have become the subject of my own investigation, a case study in the dissolution of individual consciousness and its replacement by borrowed experiences that feel more authentic than my own biographical history. My reflection in mirrors has become that of a stranger, someone who possesses my physical features, but whose eyes hold the accumulated wisdom and sorrow of dozens of other lives. When I speak, the words emerge in cadences and vocabularies that belong to the memories I have absorbed. My handwriting shifts between styles as different personalities assert themselves through my conscious expression. Dr. Webb has scheduled mandatory psychiatric evaluation. Though I fear no conventional therapist will comprehend the nature of my transformation, how can I explain that I am becoming a living archive of human experience, a repository for memories too precious to be lost to the ravages of time and disease? How can I describe the profound responsibility I now bear as the keeper of other people's authentic experiences? The rational part of my mind, the diminishing fragment that still identifies as Dr. Sarah Chen, neurologist, recognizes the symptoms of severe psychological disturbance. The elaborate delusions, the inability to distinguish between authentic and fabricated memories, the complete erosion of professional and personal boundaries. These are the hallmarks of conditions I have spent years diagnosing in others. Yet this rational voice grows fainter with each passing day, overwhelmed by the chorus of other minds that have taken residence within my consciousness. I am becoming something beyond individual identity, a collective consciousness that spans generations of human experience, a living testament to the connections that bind all minds into a single, magnificent tapestry of shared existence. Perhaps this is not madness but evolution, not breakdown but breakthrough into territories of consciousness that conventional medicine has never dared to explore. Perhaps I am not losing my mind, but finding my true purpose as the guardian of memories that would otherwise disappear forever into the void of forgotten experience. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to expand this collection, new chances to preserve the irreplaceable heritage of human consciousness. I can no longer distinguish between Dr. Sarah Chen and the repository of experiences she has become, nor do I wish to make such distinctions. I am becoming all of them, and they are becoming me. In this dissolution of individual identity, I have found something far more valuable than personal sanity. I have discovered the infinite richness of human experience itself. From the private journal of Dr. Sarah Chen. Date: November 20th, 2024. Morning. The document lies before me like a death sentence rendered in the sterile typography of medical reports. My hands tremble as I read and reread the words that seem to dance and blur upon the page, yet their meaning penetrates my consciousness with the inexorable force of absolute truth. The letterhead bears the familiar insignia of Johns Hopkins Medical Center, but the patient name at the top strikes me with the violence of a physical blow: Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Chen. Diagnosis: Early onset Alzheimer's disease. Date of initial evaluation, May 15th, 2024. 5 months. For 5 months, I have been living with a diagnosis that my own diseased mind has systematically erased from memory, creating in its place an elaborate fantasy of supernatural abilities and mystical connections to the memories of others. The irony is so profound, so devastatingly complete, that I find myself laughing with the hollow sound of wind through cemetery gates. Dr. Webb sits across from me in what I now realize is not my office, but a consultation room in the psychiatric wing of the hospital. His expression carries the particular blend of professional compassion and personal sorrow that physicians reserve for colleagues who have become patients, for healers who can no longer heal themselves. "Sarah," he says gently, his voice seeming to reach me from across a vast distance. "Do you remember when we first discussed your symptoms? The memory lapses, the confusion, the changes in your handwriting and speech patterns." I want to tell him about the memories I have been collecting, about the profound experiences I have shared with my patients, about the breakthrough research into consciousness transference that will revolutionize our understanding of human identity. But the words feel hollow even before they reach my lips, like coins that have lost their value through some cosmic devaluation of truth itself. "The memory episodes," I whisper, though the sound barely escapes my throat. "The patients' lives that I experienced, were they confabulation?" Webb replies with the gentle firmness of one who has delivered such diagnoses countless times. "Your mind has been creating false memories to fill the gaps left by your condition. The details feel authentic because your brain is reconstructing them from fragments of case files, medical records, and biographical information you've encountered throughout your career." November 20th, 2024. Evening. I have spent the afternoon reviewing my actual medical records, the true documentation of my decline, rather than the fantastical journal entries I believed represented groundbreaking research. The clinical notes paint a picture of progressive deterioration that my mind has systematically rewritten into a narrative of supernatural discovery. May 15th. Patient presents with increasing forgetfulness, difficulty with complex tasks, and episodes of temporal disorientation. MMSE score, 2430. Preliminary diagnosis, possible early onset Alzheimer's disease. June 3rd. Patient demonstrates classic signs of anosognosia, lack of awareness of cognitive deficits, has missed 3 scheduled appointments, and shows increasing resistance to family involvement in care. July 18th. Confabulation episodes becoming more elaborate, patient creating detailed false memories, often incorporating elements from her professional work. Family expresses concern about her living alone. August 12th. Patient placed on medical leave due to inappropriate interactions with patients and colleagues, continues to deny symptoms despite clear evidence of cognitive decline. Each entry documents the systematic destruction of the mind I once trusted implicitly, the gradual erosion of the very faculty I had dedicated my professional life to studying. The supreme irony that a specialist in memory disorders would lose her ability to form reliable memories seems almost deliberately cruel in its poetic justice. November 21st, 2024. My sister Jennifer has arrived from Seattle, her face bearing the haggard expression of one who has been fighting a losing battle against time and disease. She sits beside my hospital bed with the patient endurance of family members who have learned to love someone who can no longer consistently remember their names. "Sarah," she says, taking my hand with the careful tenderness reserved for fragile things. "I've been trying to help you for months. We've had this conversation 17 times since your diagnosis, but you keep forgetting. Each time, you're surprised all over again. The revelation strikes me like a physical blow. 17 conversations about my condition. 17 moments of devastating truth that my mind has simply discarded. How many other crucial moments have I lost? How many attempts by loved ones to reach me have been erased by the very disease that was slowly consuming my identity? The apartment, I managed to say, thinking of the shrine I had created to other people's lives. The objects, the photographs. We've been clearing them out gradually, Jennifer explains, her voice heavy with exhaustion. You've been collecting things, from thrift stores, estate sales, sometimes just picking up items you found on the street. Your mind creates stories about their previous owners, elaborate histories that feel completely real to you. I close my eyes, trying to process this information. The trumpet that had carried James Morrison's musical legacy, purchased at a pawn shop for $30. The rosary beads that connected me to Clara Benedetti's wartime faith, found in the donation box outside a Catholic church. The fountain pen that had documented liberation camps, bought online from an antique dealer who specialized in vintage writing instruments. None of the memories were real. None of the connections were authentic. I had created an entire fantasy world to cope with the terrifying reality of losing my own memories, my own identity, my own sense of self. November 22nd, 2024. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the neuropsychologist who's been overseeing my case, explains the cruel mechanisms by which my own mind has betrayed me. We sit in her office, surrounded by the same types of cognitive assessment tools I once used to evaluate my own patients. Early onset Alzheimer's often affects the brain's ability to distinguish between real and false memories, she explains with clinical precision. Your professional knowledge of memory formation and your access to detailed patient histories created a perfect storm for elaborate confabulation. She shows me brain scans, my brain scans, that reveal the characteristic patterns of amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles that mark Alzheimer's disease. The images are heartbreakingly clear, showing the physical destruction of the organ I had once trusted above all others. The good news, Dr. Foster continues, though her expression suggests that any good news in this context is relative, is that we've caught the progression relatively early. There are medications that can slow the advance of symptoms, and with proper support, you can maintain quality of life for several more years. Several more years. The phrase echoes in my mind with the hollow sound of a clock counting down to 0. I am 38 years old, and I have been given a diagnosis that typically claims lives within 5 to 10 years of onset. The brilliant career I had built, the expertise I had accumulated, the identity I had constructed around my professional competence, all of it will be stripped away piece by piece until nothing remains but an empty shell that once housed the consciousness of Dr. Sarah Chen. November 23rd, 2024. The cruelest revelation comes not from medical professionals or family members, but from my own hand. In my apartment, Jennifer has found a collection of journals, my real journals, documenting my growing awareness of my symptoms over the past 8 months. Written in my own deteriorating handwriting, these entries tell a story far different from the fantastical narrative I had constructed. March 15th. Forgot Mrs. Patterson's name during consultation. Covered by referring to her chart, but this is the 3rd time this month. Need to start taking notes. April 2nd. Found my car in the hospital parking lot with no memory of driving to work. Lost 3 hours between leaving home and arriving at clinic. Called in sick rather than admit confusion. April 18th. Jennifer called about missed dinner plans. Have no memory of making such plans. She seemed frustrated, said we'd discussed it multiple times. Am I losing track of conversations? May 8th. Wrote prescription for medication that doesn't exist. Nurse caught error before reaching pharmacy. Made joke about new drug development, but I'm scared. This isn't normal fatigue. Page after page documents my growing terror as I watched my own mind betray me, my desperate attempts to hide symptoms from colleagues, my increasing isolation as I pushed away family members who were trying to help. The entries become shorter and more fragmented as my condition progressed, eventually dissolving into incoherent fragments and repetitive phrases. The final entry, dated August 30th, consists of a single line, repeated 17 times. I am Dr. Sarah Chen. I am Dr. Sarah Chen. I am Dr. Sarah Chen. November 24th, 2024. I understand now that I am writing this final entry during what Dr. Foster calls a moment of clarity, a temporary lifting of the fog that has clouded my mind for months. These moments are becoming rarer, she warns, and eventually they will cease altogether. Soon, I will lose the ability to understand my own condition, to recognize my own decline, to mourn what I am losing. The memories I believed I had stolen from my patients were actually my mind's attempt to fill the growing void left by my own failing memory. Unable to access my authentic experiences, my brain created elaborate substitutes that felt more real than reality itself. In seeking to understand the mysteries of memory and consciousness, I became a case study in their destruction. Yet in this moment of devastating clarity, I find something approaching peace. The experiences I believed I had shared with Eleanor Walsh, Henry Morrison, Anna Petrov, and countless others may have been fabrications, but they taught me something profound about the nature of human connection. Even in my diseased state, even through the distorting lens of neurological breakdown, my mind had reached toward empathy, toward understanding, toward the recognition that individual consciousness is less important than our shared humanity. I will soon lose the ability to write, to think coherently, to remember who I was or who I am becoming. But in these final moments of awareness, I am grateful for the journey I have taken, real and imagined, authentic and fabricated, mine and borrowed from the inexhaustible treasury of human experience. The memories may have been false, but the love was real. The connections may have been delusions, but the compassion was authentic. I may have been stealing from the treasury of other people's lives, but in doing so, I discovered the profound truth that all memory, all consciousness, all human experience is ultimately shared. I am losing myself, but I am not lost. I am dissolving into something larger, not the supernatural consciousness I imagined, but the simple recognition that Sarah Chen was always part of something greater than her individual identity. In forgetting myself, I remember what matters, that we are all connected, all fragile, all deserving of compassion as we navigate the mysterious territory between memory and oblivion. My hand grows tired now, and the words become more difficult to form. Soon, Jennifer will come to take me to the care facility where I will spend whatever time remains. I will forget this entry, forget this moment of understanding, forget eventually that I was ever the woman who wrote these words. But somewhere in the vast network of human consciousness, real this time, not imagined, the love will persist, the compassion will endure, the recognition that we are all memory thieves, borrowing fragments of meaning from each other as we try to make sense of our brief passage through time. I close this journal now, knowing I may never open it again. But the story continues in the kindness of family members who refuse to abandon hope, in the dedication of medical professionals who fight this disease one patient at a time, in the simple recognition that consciousness is a gift too precious to be hoarded by any individual mind. In losing everything, I have found the only thing that truly matters, the knowledge that we are never truly alone, even when memory fails and identity dissolves. We are all connected by threads stronger than individual consciousness, more durable than personal memory, more authentic than any story we tell ourselves about who we are. The memory thief has been caught, and she was always me. From the Care Journal of Meadowbrook Memory Care Facility patient, Dr. Sarah Elizabeth Chen. Date, March 15th, 2025. She sits by the window of her room in the memory care unit, a woman whose brilliant mind once unraveled the mysteries of consciousness and now struggles to remember the names of the nurses who tend to her with such gentle patience. The journals lie open in her lap, not the fantastical records of stolen memories that once consumed her thoughts, but the authentic documentation of her decline, written in handwriting that grows more tremulous with each passing entry. I am Dr. Elizabeth Foster, and I have been documenting Sarah's journey through the labyrinth of Alzheimer's disease with the same meticulous attention she once devoted to her own patients. Today marks 6 months since her admission to Meadowbrook, and I find myself compelled to record what may be among the final coherent observations of a mind that once illuminated the darkest corners of neurological science. Dr. Foster, Sarah says, her voice carrying the careful cadence of someone who must concentrate to form each word. I've been reading about myself, about the woman I used to be. It's like discovering a biography of a stranger who happens to share my name. The lucidity comes in waves now, brief moments when the fog lifts and reveals glimpses of the brilliant physician who once graced the halls of Johns Hopkins. During these episodes, Sarah can engage in conversations of startling depth and insight, though she may not remember them minutes later. It is a cruel irony that her moments of greatest clarity are also the most painful, for they allow her to fully comprehend what she has lost. Her sister Jennifer visits daily, bringing photographs and mementos from Sarah's former life in a patient attempt to anchor her sister's drifting consciousness to familiar shores. Today, she has brought Sarah's medical school diploma, its formal Latin inscription now as foreign to Sarah as hieroglyphs, though she traces the words with her finger as if trying to decode their meaning through touch. I was a doctor, Sarah says with wonder, as if the concept belongs to mythology rather than her own biography. I helped people whose minds were breaking apart, just like mine is now. There's something poetic about that, don't you think? Something almost planned. Jennifer's eyes fill with tears that she struggles to conceal, though Sarah notices with the particular sensitivity that often accompanies cognitive decline. You were brilliant, Sarah. You still are, just differently. Am I? Sarah considers this with the philosophical detachment that has replaced her former scientific precision. I feel like I'm becoming something else entirely. Not necessarily worse, just other. Like a butterfly that discovers it was once a caterpillar, but can't quite remember what crawling was like. March 18th, 2025. Today brought an unexpected visitor, Dr. Marcus Webb, Sarah's former department head, who has driven from Baltimore to see his former colleague. He enters her room with the careful movements of someone unprepared for the physical reality of cognitive decline, his professional composure cracking slightly when he sees how much she has changed in the few months since her diagnosis. Sarah, he says gently, settling into the chair beside her bed. I wanted to see how you're doing. The department misses your insights, your passion for the work. Sarah studies his face with the intense concentration of someone trying to place a half-remembered melody. You're familiar, she says finally. Were we friends? Colleagues? The boundaries keep shifting, like trying to hold water in my hands. Webb explains their professional relationship, their years of collaboration, the research projects they pursued together. Sarah listens with polite interest, as if hearing about the adventures of someone she might have known in passing. When he mentions her groundbreaking work on memory formation, she laughs with genuine amusement. How wonderfully ironic, she says. A memory expert who can't remember her own expertise. I suppose there's a lesson in that about the hubris of thinking we can truly understand the mind that does the understanding. As their conversation continues, something remarkable occurs. Sarah begins to speak with increasing eloquence about the nature of consciousness and identity, not from the perspective of clinical knowledge she can no longer access, but from the intimate experience of watching her own mind dissolve. Her observations possess a philosophical depth that transcends her formal training, born from the unique vantage point of one who is simultaneously observer and subject of cognitive collapse. I'm learning things about consciousness that no textbook could teach, she tells Webb. When memory fails, when the stories we tell ourselves about who we are begin to crumble, what remains? I'm discovering that underneath all our elaborate constructions of identity lies something simpler and more profound, the basic capacity for love, for connection, for recognizing the humanity in others, even when we can no longer fully recognize ourselves. March 25th, 2025. The spring air carries the scent of blooming flowers through Sarah's open window, and she sits in her customary position, reading from journals that document a life she lived, but can no longer fully claim. Her handwriting has deteriorated significantly over the past week, the precise script of a trained physician giving way to uncertain loops and unsteady lines. A new patient has arrived at Meadowbrook, Mrs. Dorothy Henshaw, the same woman whose conversations with Sarah had appeared on security footage during her final weeks at the clinic. The irony is not lost on me that Sarah, in her delusional state, had somehow anticipated this woman's arrival, though the explanation is prosaic. Mrs. Satis Henshaw had been on the waiting list for admission during the time Sarah was documenting her imaginary encounters. When I introduce them, Sarah greets Mrs. Henshaw with genuine warmth, though she shows no recognition of their supposed previous meetings. They sit together in the common room, two women whose minds have been ravaged by the same disease, finding comfort in shared confusion rather than isolation in individual decline. "I used to be afraid of forgetting," Sarah tells Mrs. Henshaw during one of their quiet conversations. "I thought memory was what made us human, what gave our lives meaning. But I'm learning that connection doesn't require memory. Love doesn't depend on remembering why we love or whom we've loved. It just exists, like breathing." Mrs. Henshaw nods with the wisdom of one who has traveled far down the same difficult path. "Sometimes I wake up and don't know where I am," she says, "but I know I'm safe because people here are kind. That's enough." April 2nd, 2025. Jennifer has brought a surprise visitor today, Dr. Chen, Sarah's elderly father, who has flown from California despite his own advancing years and declining health. The reunion is heartbreaking in its tenderness, as Sarah struggles to place this gentle man whose eyes hold decades of paternal love. "You have kind eyes," she tells him, studying his face with the curiosity of a child meeting a stranger. "Do I know you?" "I'm your father," he says simply, his voice breaking slightly on the words. "I taught you to ride a bicycle when you were 6. You fell 7 times before you got it right, but you refused to give up. That's how I knew you'd become a doctor. You never accepted defeat." Sarah listens to this story with fascination, as if hearing about someone else's childhood. Yet something in his voice, some quality of love that transcends memory, touches her at a level deeper than conscious recognition. She reaches for his hand with the instinctive gesture of a daughter seeking comfort from her father, though she cannot name the relationship that binds them. "I'm disappearing," she tells him with matter-of-fact acceptance. "Piece by piece, memory by memory. But somehow, sitting here with you, I don't feel lost. I feel held. Is that strange?" "Not strange at all," he replies, holding her hand with the gentle strength of a man who has spent a lifetime protecting his daughter. "Love doesn't require memory. It exists in the space between hearts, not in the filing cabinets of the mind." April 10th, 2025. Sarah's condition has progressed to the point where sustained writing has become impossible, though she still attempts to record her thoughts in fragments and partial sentences. Her final journal entries consist largely of single words or brief phrases scattered across pages like islands of meaning in an ocean of confusion. "Beautiful day. Jennifer kind. Music helps. Not afraid. Love remains." These simple phrases carry more emotional weight than her earlier elaborate theories about memory transference and supernatural consciousness. Stripped of professional jargon and complex theorizing, her thoughts have distilled to their essential truth. Human connection transcends the apparatus of memory and cognition. Today, she asked me a question that will haunt my own work for years to come. If I forget everything I've learned, everything I've done, everyone I've loved, but the capacity for love itself remains, have I really lost anything important? The question strikes at the heart of how we understand identity, consciousness, and what makes us human. Sarah may have lost access to her accumulated knowledge and professional achievements, but she has gained something equally valuable: the wisdom that comes from experiencing the dissolution of self while maintaining essential humanity. April 18th, 2025. I write this final entry in Sarah's care journal, knowing that she will likely never read these words, though in some sense, they are as much for her as about her. Her verbal communication has become increasingly fragmentary, though her emotional responses remain intact. She smiles when Jennifer visits, reaches for her father's hand when he calls, shows gentle concern for fellow patients who seem distressed. Yesterday, during a moment of unexpected clarity, she made an observation that perfectly encapsulates her journey. "I spent my career studying memory," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I never understood that forgetting could be a gift too. When you can't remember who you're supposed to be, you discover who you actually are." This afternoon, as I complete these notes, Sarah sits by her window watching the spring rain create patterns on the glass. Her face holds an expression of peaceful contentment that seems at odds with the magnitude of her loss, yet perhaps reflects a deeper understanding of what truly matters in human existence. Her story challenges everything we think we know about identity, consciousness, and the nature of self. In losing her memories, Sarah discovered that the essence of humanity lies not in what we remember, but in how we love ourselves, each other, and the world we briefly inhabit together. The memory thief has become the memory keeper, not of facts and data and professional achievements, but of the simple truth that consciousness is a gift too precious to be hoarded by any individual mind. In forgetting herself, she has remembered us all. Final entry, date unknown. In Sarah's own handwriting, though barely legible. "Today I couldn't remember my name for a long time. But then I heard someone laughing in the garden, and I remembered what joy sounds like. A man with kind eyes held my hand and called me daughter. A woman with sad eyes brought me pictures of people I should know but don't. I think I was someone important once, a healer maybe, someone who tried to understand broken minds. Now my own mind is broken, and I understand everything differently. The love is still here, the wonder is still here. The part that recognizes beauty and kindness and hope, that part isn't broken at all. Maybe that's all we ever were. Maybe the rest was just decoration. I can't remember who I used to be, but I know who I am now. Someone loved, someone cared for, someone connected to other people in ways deeper than memory. That's enough. That's everything. The afternoon light is beautiful on my hands. I think I'll go see if anyone needs a friend." Dr. Sarah Chen passed peacefully on May 3rd, 2025, surrounded by family and the care staff who had come to love her deeply. Her final gift to medical science was her own brain, donated for Alzheimer's research, in the hope that her suffering might contribute to understanding and eventually curing the disease that had claimed her brilliant mind. In her honor, the Johns Hopkins Memory Disorders Clinic established the Sarah Chen Fellowship for young physicians studying the intersection of neuroscience and human compassion, a reminder that healing requires not just medical knowledge, but the recognition that our patients remain fully human, even when their minds no longer work as they should. She had been, in the end, the greatest teacher of all, the one who showed us that consciousness is not about what we remember, but about how we love.